joining. So just as a brief background, today we'll be talking to the sort of strategic imperative for automation, what current trends we're seeing in the global market, and particularly across sort of financial services, investment management, and wealth businesses. We'll then sort of hand over to David, who's going to sort of talk us through how automation is actually going through a sort of wave of innovation at the moment, both in terms of sort of the rise of cloud-based automation and the benefits that that can bring, and then moving into how artificial intelligence and some of those techniques are now being deployed into integrated automation solutions. So I think it's a really exciting time in terms of the opportunities that are available. So as a brief introduction, Simeon, I'm a director within our advisory consulting practice here at Deloitte, and I lead our practice across the Channel Islands with a sort of prime focus on digital transformation. David?
Thanks, Sim. David Adams, Associate Director in the Risk Advisory team in Deloitte. I specialise in robotics and intelligent automation. I'm based in the UK mainland, which is why I'm in my kitchen rather than a fancy meeting room with a nice painting, like Sim is. But very excited to get back, hopefully, over to the Channel Islands soon. Before COVID hit, I was over there most weeks for a few days. And in the Channel Islands, I lead our activities around robotics, and we've worked with a number of clients on the islands to ensure they get the benefits of those technologies.
Thanks, David. So where do we start? So I think in context, and I think the pandemic has sort of been a sort of great leveler for businesses in terms of reviewing their sort of strategy around digital enablement. And I think I'd probably say it's sort of unlikely now that strategic business decisions will be made without being technology enabled. And I think that's quite a bold statement, but we're now into a time when our ability to sort of connect, collaborate, and innovate has gone exponential, and sort of creates a remarkable set of new possibilities for business and society. And although AI has sort of become sort of ubiquitous and quite widely spoken about in many ways, particularly over the last 12 months, it can sort of help to guide strategies, sort of improve processes, and help shape new business models. So organizations are sort of rethinking their customer experiences and identifying new areas of growth. And we're only just scratching the surface of this at the moment. So it's not about people versus machines, in our view. It's actually about augmenting teams and human beings with machines to actually reach even greater heights and sort of power business benefits. So actually improved use of data with precision, access to analytics, and to sort of generate those insights, and to automate with intelligence, which is the focus for today. With this digitization, I think there's also required to sort of revisit things like risk frameworks and risk models. And whilst operational risks will be reduced and efficiencies sort of gained, I think we do need to do this responsibly. So we have a sort of strong focus on use of artificial intelligence on an ethical basis, and also then managing associated digital risks through improved sort of cyber prevention measures, etc. So if we look at sort of some of the sort of themes we're seeing in investment and wealth management industry, a prime focus for the island, so I think there are a number of common trends that we're seeing across this, but also wider sectors. Customers becoming more savvy, so your sort of clients who are experiencing digital in their daily lives. I think organizations are now looking for a digital first experience from their providers or through their business interactions. Secondly, I think cloud has seen sort of an exponential growth, and I think it's not only in terms of moving applications to the cloud. I think the move of data to the cloud has sort of really enabled a whole set of technologies in the automation ecosystem to be developed. We've already spoken to the sort of pandemic, but this shift to remote working has certainly been a trigger for organizations to sort of consider their digital strategies, and has also then required a sort of step change in approach to sort of control and manage those new environments. And automation can certainly play a part in that. As we sort of look through to sort of the market and the business side of things, I think you may have heard the term hyper-personalization, but the adoption of digital techniques sort of really does allow you to sort of harness your products in a slightly different way and tailor those to individual clients and customers. ESG, so sort of environment, social and governance growth has also seen a sort of huge prominence over the last 12 months. And the opportunity for sort of green products and managing the data associated with that is sort of very prominent at the moment. And we've got a session tomorrow on use of ESG data and how to extract the value from that. But all of these things sort of talk to sort of increased data sets and more complex data sets, which then need managing, collating, and integrating with existing platforms and processes. So from an automation perspective, I think we're sort of seeing a move from what was historically just a sort of cost efficiency play around task-based automation into opportunities to sort of save to transform and actually look at end-to-end process and capture those. And this sort of trend, we sort of see this move away from task-based automation into what we're now sort of terming intelligent automation. And I think that the key components of that is that we've got a converging technology landscape and ecosystem where you don't just deploy a robot, you actually want to integrate robotics with intelligent documentation, with digital workflow, with data and analytics, so that you can actually start to target the more complex end-to-end processes and actually add value both to your sort of clients, but also actually sort of enable your teams as well, so that they can do more with less and actually sort of reduce the sort of more mundane processes and tasks that they're engaged with. And I think in doing so, you start to sort of see sort of end-to-end sort of seamless processes with the necessary human touch points to sort of enable controls, manage risk. But I think from a cost perspective, you not only introduce efficiency, you're releasing capacity to do other things within the business, you're reducing operational risk, and you're sort of providing an audit trail across your control environment. So I think great opportunities there, particularly in terms of sort of common pain points such as sort of payments, regulatory and compliance activities. So we thought it'd be useful just to use the polls functionality which Ben will kindly pop up in a moment, but really ask a couple of questions today. One is sort of, where is your organization on their RPA journey? So we've got 4 options there. We've not started yet. We're piloting, we're already implementing, or we're scaling. So it'd be great to sort of get the answers on these. Okay, so we ready, Ben, to show the results? So I think that's quite clear. I think whilst sort of some that haven't started on that journey, I think the large majority are in that piloting stage with initial, and some actually then more mature in terms of implementation and scaling. Right, so if we move on to our next question. So I think this is a common question that both gets asked of us, but also one that we ask our clients in terms of what are the top barriers to scaling automation. And I think the number of different options we've provided there really sort of shows the number of decision points and support that these types of programs actually require within the organization in terms of enablement. Okay, shall we have a look at the responses, Ben? It's great. So I think 2 front runners there, although quite evenly balanced across the responses, but executive support and alignment and cost to implement being quite significant amongst the group today. So all very interesting. I think one of the reasons we sort of asked that is really we run an annual global survey on automation that's been running for a number of years now. I just wanted to sort of get measure in terms of where we're at locally on an automation journey versus what we're seeing from our clients more widely. So I think what we're seeing is that last year we had a sort of dramatic rise up to 73% of respondents who had actually then commenced an automation journey. And the fact that the sort of number deploying at scale, whilst has increased, is probably not as dramatic as we would have expected. Some of the reasons for that, I think the main reason that was coming out was actually sort of resistance to change within organizations, and that's seen quite a dramatic rise, albeit that process fragmentation or lack of IT readiness was still considered a top barrier within the organization, and sort of cost to implement becoming an increased perception in terms of that barrier to change. So if we move over to the next slide, then I think some further extracts from that survey, which sort of looked at what were the the top technologies being used. So I think robotic process automation was still the predominant technology, but also then supported through some of the digital document management solutions, and then the sort of digital workflow. Thing that we've seen increase across these surveys is actually the sort of adoption and use of artificial intelligence, and David will talk to how those are being integrated into automation solutions a little later on. Interesting one for me is quite often automation is being used to sort of automate what organizations do today. And I think that may be reflective of the fact that technologies implemented over the past 5 years have predominantly been focused on individual task automations, which are part of a larger end-to-end process. However, what we're now seeing is that with the seamless integration of different types of technologies and the move away from task-based automation to end-to-end processes, actually we're probably anticipating that there will be more focus and opportunity on sort of redefining and redesigning the end-to-end process and associated customer experience and employee experience. So I thought just useful to provide some of those sort of takeaways from the report. So very happy to sort of hand over to David now, who will sort of walk through a series of latest innovations that we're seeing in the automation space.
Thank you very much, Sim. So we're going to talk about the rise of automation in the cloud first, and then talk about cognitive and AI as the second key theme. So what we've seen distinctly from our perspective in the last year or two is where traditionally the vast majority, I would say, of organizations starting on their RPA journey were doing so with essentially an on-premise setup, virtual servers on their premises, with a bot on each one, essentially, with obviously the control room and everything else on top of it. Now the trend, particularly for organizations that are starting fresh, shall we say, in terms of RPA and associated technologies, are really starting to move to the cloud. And I would say probably about 2/3, 75% of the new client projects we work on, the automation is being directly deployed into the cloud. So it's definitely one of the key trends we're seeing at the moment, and will likely just accelerate over the next 12 to 24 months. So why is that? What are some of the benefits of automation in the cloud? So I think a big one is in terms of deployment speed. We've got here on the slide some timeframes in terms of what it might take to scale to get the large numbers of robots on an on-premise situation, 6 to 24 months, much quicker typically when you're doing automation in the cloud. And I think also for organizations at the start or near the start of their journey, it can be a lot quicker, particularly for medium and large organizations. I've had many instances in the past where we're talking to the project sponsor, maybe somebody in operations, they've got sign off for an exciting RPA program, they're raring to go, they're really excited about starting to deliver benefits, but it takes 3 to 6 months before you can even start building the robots, because the organization's got to set up all the infrastructure, work out all the security policies, get all the governance and risk teams on board. And that's essentially frustrating in many cases, because as a business, you want to get started delivering benefits. And if you've got a business case and it takes 6 months longer to start realizing those benefits, then that's clearly not an ideal situation. And the good thing about automation in the cloud is that because a lot of these cloud-based automation platforms now already exist, it's simply a case of spending a few weeks getting the secure VPN connection set up, so you're connecting your client, your organization's IT systems up with the cloud automation platform, and then you can immediately get started on the journey of configuring, customizing solutions based on your specific business processes. So I'd say for me, that's probably the biggest benefit. Related to that, development is often quicker as well. So when everything is centralized on the cloud, what that means is it's very easy to have shared code repositories, reuse modules of code between different automations, which can accelerate delivery. And also a lot of the cloud-based automation technologies on the market at the moment, Automation Anywhere as A360 product, as an example, have quite web-based intuitive interfaces now. So that makes development a lot more straightforward, both for seasoned developers and also supporting a concept you may have heard of called citizen development, which is where you give business users the tools to develop simple bots themselves. And that fits very well in with the cloud model. It's also a really scalable way of doing robotics. So it's very straightforward if everything's in the cloud to say, okay, today I want to spin up 5 more instances of this particular robot because I've got a sudden demand in customer inquiries. And you can certainly do that on premise. It just tends to be slightly less agile in how you do it. Again, with a lot of these latest cloud-based RPA technologies, it's easier to get better license utilization and therefore allow you to do more with less. Very easy with a lot of those technologies to move from a model where you might have a virtual server with one robot on it, and that robot can only do one process, to essentially having a more pull model, and essentially those robot virtual servers can be used for whatever is necessary based off the demand at that particular time. And last of all, as we'll see when I get into some of my later slides, because these have a cloud native tool set, that means connecting RPA with machine learning technologies or natural language understanding technologies is a lot more straightforward, allowing you to deliver a wider set of benefits. And also in terms of things like automatically being up to date with the latest version, security patch, a lot of that is done for you in the cloud, and making the overall amount of effort required to maintain an RPA platform going forward is a lot more straightforward. So there's a tremendous series of reasons why automation in the cloud is almost the de facto way now of going forward with new automation platforms. So I guess what are some of the key features of intelligent automation in the cloud? So I guess you've got your secure cloud environment set up. You've got your digital workers on the platform. They could be RPA, but they could be other technologies as well, and we'll get into that. Typically, this model also aligns quite well, doesn't have to, but can align quite well with outsourcing the operation of those robots as well. So for quite a few of our clients, where we've helped them build robots, they're also not that interested in getting involved with the day-to-day monitoring, making sure the robots are up, minor change requests on the robots, MI, and essentially the cloud-based model makes it very effective for organizations who maybe don't want to get involved in that stuff, want to focus on their core business, to essentially outsource that to a robotics operations center as well. These platforms as well have also got built-in really integrated analytics in terms of what the robots are doing, what benefits are you realizing, as well as all the controls and security, provided obviously you pick the right cloud-based automation platform. One last slide of text before we get on to exciting videos, and I do have quite a few videos to show you guys if we've got enough time. I just wanted to talk briefly about the typical components you see on automation in the cloud. And this has been referenced to Deloitte's automation managed services platform in the cloud, which is called Dara. But I think they're equally applicable for other automation platforms in the cloud as well. So, I mean, the key thing here is that you do have an intelligent automation stack, which has things like RPA in it, but also has low code. That's things like OutSystems that you can use for workflow, where you need robots to go and do things, but you then need to feed back the results and then take actions from them. Machine learning, natural language processing, a lot of these terms that I'm not going into detail now because they also feature in the second innovation we'll talk about in about 5 minutes time. But essentially it's a stack of different technologies. And the way this often works with these cloud-based platforms is that then you can come along and, based off your individual use cases and what for your organization you need to automate, you can pull those products off the supermarket shelf, so to speak, and not utilize the ones that you don't need. So very flexible from that perspective. But I guess the other aspects of operating in the cloud are things like the analytics as well, the infrastructure and the architecture underlying it, the service management, which can include things like monitoring, supporting the robots, dealing with change requests, incident management. A lot of these platforms come built with all the risk and regulatory and security policies and procedures and governance set up in advance. Can get quite a tricky area. So getting a lot of this out of the box, I think, is one of the key benefits of automation in the cloud, as well as just having all of the vendor management agreements in place. Another benefit of a lot of these cloud-based platforms is because the organizations who have set up these platforms are essentially doing it for multiple organizations. They can leverage really good deals with a lot of the vendors of, for example, the RPA software, and get very, very significant, in some cases, 50% off list prices of products, meaning that, again, if it's done via this sort of cloud-based platform, it can be far more cost effective as well. And if you just wanted to do it yourself on site and go through all the vendor management yourself. Last of all, before we move on to the next topic, just wanted to give you one example of it running. Difficult to show cloud itself running because essentially it's where it's hosted, but I guess this is one of our recent cloud-based automation projects and one of the key use cases, and I'm just going to set off running. And this was for a private bank who had significant challenges around KYC, which I know very well is a common challenge for Guernsey and wider Channel Islands-based organisations as well. So this was a solution where they had essentially manual teams spending lots of time going to third-party systems like Dow Jones, going to Google, identifying information on various customers, potential customers, and then updating their systems. Essentially, what we built for them on the cloud as part of a wider set of implementations was a front end where people can go in and submit requests, and then essentially on the right-hand side, you've got an RPA digital worker that's taking the request. It's doing things like going to the organization's AML platform, updating the records, and then later as the video runs on, and this is called a cut down video in the interest of time, then he's going to third-party systems like Dow Jones, entering the information from the forms, downloading information, doing the same on systems like Google as well. And I think the intelligent bit here is being able to collate all that information, work out what's duplicate, what isn't, to then provide a collated and condensed view for people to take the decision on. And this sort of technology is great because essentially it's taking out the parts of people's day that weren't really using their deep KYC subject matter expertise, and essentially it's automating those parts and then allowing people to focus on the high value parts that require risk-based judgment, which is often looking at the collected information and then making decisions off the back of it. And in terms of the pilot for this, we started developing this within 2 to 3 weeks because it was really, really quick to just spin off on our cloud-based environment. So the second innovation I'd like to get into is cognitive and AI. Just take a brief sip of water before getting into it. Thirsty work doing these presentations. So as Sim outlined and on his nice diagram earlier, cognitive and AI is becoming increasingly important in terms of continuing benefits cases for this sort of technology, for all of the reasons that Sim outlined earlier. And you can think of this technology falling into several different buckets, many of which are listed here. So, for example, it could be reading semi-structured data sources. And there's an example later of a technology that's extracting data from invoices. It could be examples of reading pure natural language English, which for many years was the holy grail of this technology. And it's been really exciting how in the last year or two, the technology's finally got there, where it can read whole paragraphs of English text or another language, understand those, categorize different documents, and then extract data from them. Computer vision is another area. Voice processing is another one. So again, we've got a tool in Deloitte that can essentially listen to calls often used in call centers. It can make sure call agents are following scripts. It can detect their mood, how they come across on those calls. So if they're getting frustrated with customers, they can identify things like that. So there's a whole different range of technologies in cognitive and AI. RPA focused very much in terms of the structured data sources and following very specific processes. But cognitive and AI can be used for a whole use of use cases. And as Sim said, a lot of these technologies are now starting to get incorporated into the main RPA vendors' product suite, which is fantastic. Others, particularly those slightly more niche or advanced ones like natural language processing, still very much sort of standalone products on the market. And in terms of why this is becoming popular now, for all the reasons Sim said around, for many organizations, they've realized they can only get so far with task-based RPA automation, and they're going to need to include some of these advanced technologies if they want to automate more of their processes and achieve larger benefits. But I think the other aspect is just the evolution of this technology. Deloitte I think started with RPA in around 2015, and many of the things I'm going to show you in videos in the next few slides just were not possible back then. The technology is evolving at a crazy fast rate, which is fantastic to see.
We've just had one question which I thought might be quite timely to answer at this point, David, which was a question about how do organizations go about sort of selecting their processes for automation. And I know that we've been working with a sort of couple of different areas. One, I think even just using natural language processing, machine learning, we've sort of developed a solution which will take process or task level descriptions in sort of a bulk upload, and based on prior automation projects that we've delivered globally, actually that algorithm will then work out the suitability of a process to then put forward for as an automation candidate. And I think whilst that needs to be supplemented through discussing those processes with the client team, actually it does provide a good base on which to start that analysis as an accelerator. And then I think the other area which you might want to talk to, David, is probably around the sort of increased use of process mining, desktop mining, in terms of a technique to actually identify those candidates.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, and it's a really fantastic question, because as the question writer says, sometimes it can be bewildering to know where to start with this. I mean, essentially, you normally the best place to start, particularly when you're piloting this, is to find one or two really good low-hanging fruit, where essentially it's not the most complicated processes to automate first. It's ones where you'll quickly see meaningful results. You can then record videos of those robots running, show them to the board, get everybody excited, get some more budget, do some more. And I guess in terms of how you identify them, as Sim said, there's the natural language processing tools that can look through process maps. There's process mining technology, where you can install things on key systems, and it can understand, okay, in this department, 30% of effort has been processing, this type of request. So that's a really good candidate for it. And often this is complemented with more traditional approaches, such as workshops, where you can say, okay, within my organization, I want to generate efficiencies. 30% of all my headcount sits in that department. Let's implement some of this process mining together with some workshops with some SMEs in that department, and let's flesh out some ideas and then go through a qualification process. And there's also really good digital pipeline management technologies at the moment, which are really good for recording all the opportunities you're finding. And they can also be used once this process has been set up, for people in the organization to actually submit their own ideas as well, which is absolutely fantastic. So there's a whole range of different ways of doing that. Start small, think big is important. And depending on the organization, there's these different technologies that can essentially augment the previous traditional approaches for doing discovery and identifying opportunities. Right, so I'm just going to show a few examples now. Maybe we'll get 4 or 3, maybe we'll just show 2 of them, because I want to leave enough time for other questions. But this is an example, and I'm going to move around these videos to the really exciting part, of one of those semi-structured data automations. So this is Automation Anywhere's IQbot solution. And this is a great example of what Sim was talking about earlier. Automation Anywhere is one of the main players in terms of RPA, but it's branched out into intelligent automation as well, through its IQbot tool. And essentially, in this use case, what somebody's doing is they're training the technology in terms of how to read their invoices. So the end goal is to have a situation whereby, rather than people having to manually read invoices, which all invoices are similar, they all have the same sort of information, but they're all structured slightly different, so you can't do it using RPA. But the idea behind this technology, and a lot of AI, is rather than coding, you're using training. So essentially, you're giving it examples of previous invoices you've had, and you're saying, I'll just pause it here, you're saying, well, okay, I would like extracting the invoice number, the invoice date, the total, payment term, subtotal. And then the technology, for common data types like invoices, it will have a decent attempt out of the box, even not having seen your invoices before, of extracting, identifying for different invoices where the data is, like where's the subtotal, where's the payment terms. And then essentially what you're doing during training is you're seeing out of the box how it's done, and then you're saying, okay, you got most of this right, but you didn't quite get the quantity field correct. It's actually referred to as subtotal on this type of invoice, and then you can correct it. And then the great thing about this technology and its machine learning is next time it sees an invoice very similar to that in terms of format, it will then automatically get it right. So essentially, you go through that training process, and then skipping on, you can then combine that with RPA to then automate the process. So essentially, you can have a situation where, say, you're getting invoices into an inbox, you're using a robot to go into that inbox, extract the invoices, and then feed them through to this IQbot technology that's essentially using the models that you've trained it on to extract those specific data points like the invoice number, total field, payment terms. And then once it's extracted those into structured data, then your RPA can take over again, and it can go into your finance system, which in this case is SAP, and automatically upload that data. And I guess if you'd imagine this process before intelligent automation, where you just had RPA, you wouldn't have been able to automate much of it, because the RPA wouldn't be able to deal with the fact that invoices are different formats. And while you could extract the invoices from the email inbox, you couldn't really do much else of the process. So the fantastic thing about the fact that the technology is evolving so much around intelligent automation is that you might look at a process before your business and say, well, I'd really like to automate that. It's taking up 3 of my FTE processing all these invoices on a weekly basis. But RPA just doesn't have the skill set to fully do it. The great thing about the rise of intelligent automation is you can now do many of the use cases and automate them that you couldn't do previously, which is brilliant. I'll probably just show one more video if that's okay, and then move on. I'll probably show this one. So this is one of the newest products we've started to work with, that's called Reinfer. Every organization, and I know from Channel Arms organizations this also applies, has challenges with emails. A lot of the time you're just dealing with emails and your staff are dealing with emails, which is not making best use of their time. This technology is really, really powerful. So what it can do is, this is for an investment bank as an example, but with no knowledge of your business, you can give this an email mailbox or multiple email mailboxes, and it can analyze several months of emails and categorize them in terms of, these emails in terms of their content are the same types of emails. And then what you can do is you can say, okay, the technology identified that these are all the same type of emails. They're all amendment requests, for example. So you can label its categorization. And then what you can do as a business is then you can understand, well, emails are really important to my business, but what are we doing? We're getting, in the last month, we've had 58 coupon claim emails in. We've had 128 urgent ones. And this sort of intelligence is really useful to many businesses to understand. It can give them insights into their business processes and how to serve customers better. But it can also understand if people are saying, well, I never get much actual work done because I'm spending half of my day dealing with emails. What types of emails is it that are proving frustrating and time consuming for your business? And then taking that a step further, what you can then do off the back of that is essentially say, okay, the technology has automatically categorized my emails, and we've sense checked that. Let's then set up what this technology calls triggers, which is, okay, if I get an email in of this category, rather than previously sending that to this team to deal with manually and to read through and to update systems, you can then use this technology to then extract data from those emails and then connect to RPA robots that can then do whatever the humans were doing with those emails, which could have been they were sending them to a team, or it could have been they were taking data from those emails, checking it to one of your backend systems and then replying. So, I mean, the technology and how it can now do things like read natural language, classify it, and extract data is proving so valuable for organizations who can now identify far many use cases for automation than they previously were able to. That's probably enough of me rabbiting on. So I'll hand back over to Sim for some key takeaways.
Yeah, thank you, David. So I think sort of key takeaways from the session is sort of, one, we're sort of rapidly seeing automation moving to the cloud, along with its sort of enablers in terms of data moving to the cloud. Significant move from what's traditionally transition from a sort of task based process to sort of organizations now looking end-to-end processes and using those enabling technologies. For those enabling technologies, we're sort of now seeing sort of artificial intelligence techniques being embedded, both in terms of solutions that organizations like ourselves are developing, but also with the wider vendor landscape in this area, either through consolidation in the industry or through development. And we're seeing a sort of greater percentage of organizations looking to actually buy into sort of platforms as a service where each of these technologies can be consumed easily, and organizations don't necessarily have to invest in the infrastructure, the training, or building the associated skills in order to operate them. And in this sort of fast-moving sort of technology landscape, actually being able to consume these technologies at a sort of small or large scale actually sort of removes some of those barriers to entry that we highlighted from the survey earlier in the presentation. And I think my final point, I think a lot of organizations, we saw that with the poll earlier, that a lot of organizations are starting on their journey and already got automation programs underway. We're actually now seeing the sort of early adopters sort of really moving to scale and embedding digital workers as part of their workforce and associated operating model. So great, thank you, David. Right, so we've got a couple of questions that have popped up. First one's a very interesting one. I think who should make the decision regarding automation? Is it the CIO or the CIO? I think we can both respond to this. I think I would always say that automation should be a sort of business-led decision, and as such, the COO will be a sort of key stakeholder in deciding what to automate, at what pace, and sort of really building that digital worker into the broader operating model and understanding and realizing the benefits. However, I think that's not done in isolation, and the CIO is sort of part and parcel of that decision making in terms of understanding the strategic fit into the organization's architecture, understanding how technology should be deployed and what the roadmap is for that, whether that's on-premise or moving to platform solutions that we've spoken about today. So it's increasingly sort of see that integration at the board level in terms of enabling strategy through technology. So David, I don't know if you've got anything further to add there.
I mean, your answer was so magnificent there, Sim. I just ended up repeating what you said. I mean, you've covered all the points I would have made.
Right. And then next question, I think sort of really around the topic of there needing to be sort of AI with ethics. I think it's a great question, sort of followed on in terms of how to ensure organizations are using AI with ethics principles and control. Does it need to be subject to regulation? I think it's an area that regulators are taking a sort of increased focus on. And certainly if we look at the theme of the week around data, I think a lot of the machine learning techniques, algorithms are using data, and we need to make sure that in designing those algorithms that they are transparent and there's a means to audit them and understand them in terms of their outputs, in order to sort of really sort of not have sort of inbuilt bias to the data that might be sort of detrimental over time in terms of the way I think algorithms continue learn. And as such, I think the ability to have sort of transparency around how organizations sort of expose how those algorithms intended to work, what are the controls and balances in terms of monitoring and having the right analytics in place to look at the outcomes to ensure that there aren't any adverse cases. And I think there are degrees of risk dependent upon the types of use cases and the type of data that you're exposed to AI. So if you've got anything further to add on that, David?
Yeah, and I'd agree with that. I mean, I think as often occurs with new technology, the regulators, particularly in the first few years of that technology, struggle to keep pace with it. So in the last year, the regulators have issued a number of consultation papers for interested parties to respond to, but it is fair to say it is taking them a while to get there and for that to feed through. But I think it is important that it does, because it genuinely, not so much on the RPA side, but when you're getting into particularly decision making engines, there are definitely risks there, and it is important to put in necessary controls to make sure it's not introducing biases based off the control data given to it. So I do agree, Adrian, there does need to be regulation. I think there will be regulation coming, and I think there's certainly a whole series of guidelines out there for organisations to utilise now, even before that regulation comes in. They're forced to do some of that stuff.
Right, and I think a related question, David, in terms of how do you protect against bias in those models?
I mean, very, very difficult in I guess in 3 minutes to go into detail on that. I mean, I think part of it is around the governance and the policies and procedures, but I mean, a lot of it comes down to how those models are being designed and tested. The data sets, a lot of these technologies are related to data sets. So, they will initially be trained on a large data set, and for example, in a recruitment context, they will form basis and almost come up with a model behind the scenes based off that. I think part of it is ensuring before you feed the data into the model, that you're happy as an organization that it's not including any biases, and you're checking for common things, which are, would be things like gender or race from a recruitment type model. And I think also one of the good things about some of the latest iteration of these decision engines is they're a lot more transparent than they used to be about how they've reached decisions. So again, in testing, with the transparency that they now bring, it's very important to go through the detailed testing and understand fully how they reach the decisions, and do some rigorous checking at that point, that it is not due to factors that could ultimately relate to bias. So I think part of it is governance, policy and procedures. Part of it is just the process you go through, and I think the developments in the tools themselves really make this a lot more straightforward, or certainly easier than it was in the past, in order to make sure before such a model goes live that it's not got inherent bias in it.
Yeah, and I think the only thing I would also add is ensuring that you still have the right controls in place. So if there are decisions that are affecting outcomes for clients, for example, is actually making sure you've got the right handoffs into human decisions, and that's technology enabling sort of humans not just acting independently. And you'd still then apply sort of similar sort of audit techniques to outcomes. So you're actually measuring outputs and outcomes alongside using those new sets of data in a different way. So I think that is it for questions, and probably quite timely as well, as we've reached the top of the hour.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you both to Simeon and to David for a very interesting presentation. we will be following up to everybody who's attended today with a copy of the presentation and the recording. Obviously, any other questions that anyone may have, please do pop them through and we can connect you up after the call. We will be returning with Deloitte tomorrow as well for another webinar around the value of ESG data. There's a link in the chat, so please do pop on there and take a look at the programme for the rest of the week. But thank you very much to both of you for today's presentation.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Liz.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.